Might help if I take my mic off of mute. It's really good to be back. Before I kind of start my part, though, we have something special this morning. I'm going to ask Michelle England if she'll come up here. And there's the mic right there on the front. So y'all know Michelle's our part-time children's minister. And so, Michelle, first question I have for you is, did y'all miss me while I was gone?
We definitely did. It's just not the same without Kevin around.
She didn't know I was going to ask her that.
I mean that genuinely, though.
So tell me how children's ministry is going. I'm sure everybody'd like to know. I'm kind of curious. How's it going?
It's really, really good. If you walk around and you look in some of these classes, we are growing. I mean, we're seeing like 17 kids up in the loft every Sunday. We're seeing around 20 back in the fellowship hall. Like, that's amazing. And these kids are learning so much about Jesus, and I know I'm learning as I'm teaching too. So it's going really, really well.
And we have some babies on the way, right?
We do.
So that's good. Hey, if you want to help the children's ministry, have a baby.
Yes.
So that's,
yes, we'll take your babies. We'll love them. That sounded
right.
crazy.
More
we'll love
babies.
them.
More babies. So what's the hardest thing about being a children's minister?
I would say recruiting can be challenging. You know, we have some wonderful teachers. I mean, we have teachers who have been teaching here for probably 30, 40 years, but we want to make sure that they get a break sometimes. You know, we want to make sure that they get to make it into service, that they get to go to class. And so that can be a challenge at times.
Yeah, so let's do something real quick.
Yes.
Okay, if you've been teaching for over 40 years in the children's ministry, stand up. Over 40 years in the children's ministry. Stand up and stay up. Okay, if you've been teaching for more than 30 years in the children's ministry, stand up.
It's amazing.
All right, hang on. If you've been stay up. If you've been teaching for more than 20 years in children's ministry, stand up. Stand up and stay up. Stay up, y'all are sitting down on me. Everybody that teaches in the children's ministry now stand up. That's the way we're going to have to get it. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. I think that shows that teachers aren't doing it to show goodness. They're doing it for our
to be
kids.
noticed.
Yes.
Yeah, because they didn't all stand up.
No,
did they?
we have humble teachers.
Yeah.
Way to go, teachers.
But you need more, right?
We do need more.
Okay,
yes.
So tell these people, why should they teach? Because I know you need more teachers. We need y'all to help her. Tell them why they should teach.
Yes, I think instead of me telling you, I would like to bring up a few teachers. So I'd like the Overcast and Jessica to come on up. So this is Jessica Gillespie, and we have Frank and Joni Overcast. And I'd like to ask them a couple questions this morning. So Jessica, can you tell us what ages you teach and how long you've been teaching?
I would love to say I've been teaching for 40 years. I've only been teaching for 2, and I teach anywhere from the babies in nursery up to 5th grade.
And Jessica also helps, she and Paige together are in charge of our nursery class, and it is fabulous. So another question I have for you is, why do you teach?
Honestly, I just love the kids and the babies. They definitely teach me something almost every single week. I also learn a lot from prepping and studying to teach.
Yes, absolutely.
And she's helping grow our children's ministry, just saying.
Yes, she is. She's doing her part. Awesome. Okay. So, Joni, I would like to know the first question the same. So, what ages are you teaching, and how long have you been teaching?
So what ages we teach is the little ones, the 1st and 2nd graders, and then we do Bible hour. But we knew we were coming up here, just FYI. But even when she gave us those questions of how long, I'm like, I was like thinking back, I'm like, I have no clue. I'm not a numbers person, so I'll let Frank answer that. But he's actually been teaching more before me. He kind of actually brought me more along, so yeah.
Wonderful. And I'd also like to know, how has teaching impacted you?
Oh gosh, okay. Well, impacted me personally is they are just a joy, and they show me Jesus like nobody else. I can't even, I'm not very good with words, really. I just love them. I love every child. I don't care where they come from and what they're like. I just absolutely, genuinely love them, and they are just the closest part of being with Jesus as I can imagine. So that's how it impacts me.
And I know Joni has been so good at trying to get my little Isaac to come out of his shell, and he gives her hugs now. So she is doing amazing work, miracle work, really. Frank, I'd also like to know, probably similar, what ages you teach and how long you've been teaching.
All right, so I think I was trying to do a metric today with Libby in class. I'm teaching the high school right now. Libby is over there somewhere, or maybe, no, she's somewhere. Yes, there she is. Hi, Libby. So when the Englands came, she was in first grade, and that, I believe, was the first year that's the first year I can recall that I began teaching the first and second graders, and she is now a freshman, so that would be 8 or 9 years, whatever. I guess it'll be 9 years this fall. So we've been blessed with that, and then I do some high school, and then we've been doing the 4 through 5s. I've never confused on what that class is. But it is a lot of fun, but I'm always confused that age, what I should say. But yes, 2 through kindergarten. Yeah, and I think we've been doing that for 4 or 5 years probably. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Aren't these teachers amazing? They're so good. The last question I have, one more question for all of you is, if someone was thinking about teaching, or if we had a new teacher, what advice or words of wisdom would you give them? And I'm going to start with Frank this time.
All right, so what I constantly get when I'm teaching, and this applies to what Michelle's asking, is they exhibit such wonder in such purity and vision on what God is presenting to them through His Scripture, and what I struggle, but Sam managed to get through each week doing as well, is they show this tremendous wonder. And it's like what Jesus said to when He kind of scolded the apostles and said, look, let the children be here with me, because unless you're like them, you're not going to get it. You're not going to see who God and I really are. And that's how it feels when you see them learning and that wonder. First and second grade class is a wonderful time because they have such clear and pure motives. They want to know God. They want to see them. And those challenges change when you teach different classes. I've taught some older classes, a few more, but it's really just this wonder at that age. And then as you move forward, there's some other great things where they're engaging differently. But that's definitely the winner for me, is that pureness of their wonder and what they want. And it reminds me of what I should be like.
So it's what we'd give them advice, is that right?
Yes.
Well, I would say not to feel guilty if you haven't been teaching and you've been drawn to teach. Just jump in kind of and know you don't have to be perfect, and know that in my heart, actually, even though I am a teacher somewhat by trade, it wasn't something I actually always wanted to come here to do. It's really more the leading of Frank, who kind of tugged, and he wanted us to serve together. And so I was kind of like, okay, to be perfectly honest, God knows, I might as well tell you all. And that's just been a real blessing, and we've been really blessed by honoring him, and honestly, just being that of a wife to him and doing that together. And then of course the triple blessing of the children, and just to know you don't have to be perfect, and know that so many people have gone before us. We feel a little odd being up here because there's so many people out there that have put so much time into the curriculum through time and ages, and the Bible Hour curriculum, and they've taught for longer than us. So, we appreciate all you, and actually we've done it through time to be with friends have done the curriculum. We're like, well, we better help out, So we're more of the helpers as well, and not the leads. So we appreciate all those past leaders as well as you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. And same question, what advice would you give someone?
Yeah, I would say just do it. Even if you don't want to jump in and be a teacher at first, if you just want to be a helper, see what a class looks like, talk to Michelle. She's obviously the least intimidating person ever, and you can just see what class would fit you best. And we would love you guys to come and hold our babies.
Thank you all so very much. We appreciate it.
Something about summer, and I'll be out there real quick. Okay, real quick.
So right after church, I'll just be out in this hallway, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, we are looking for summer teachers. Summer is so hard to recruit for because people are on vacation, but even if you'll be gone for a week, please come. I will help you find a sub.
So, and just so y'all know, I've been in ministry for 37 years, and every children's ministry you talk to say that the hardest thing about being a children's minister is recruiting teachers. And these are our kids. All of them are our kids, right? And I even took a little stint, taught a few weeks a year ago in the summer, just a few weeks. And if I can do it, you can do it. Hey, it's a lot different teaching kids, let me tell you. But we need you. We need you. So,
Thank you so
any
much.
last word? No?
Thank you all so much for all the ways that you support our children. And even if teaching isn't your gift, we would love for you to help. So please see me on ways that you can help. And we'll take your prayers always.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we're so glad you're doing this for us.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. All right. So let me say something just real quickly, if y'all don't mind, to some people that are going to be watching this that aren't you. This isn't for you. You'll know that here in a second. Se você está no Brasil hoje, obrigado por assistir ao nosso culto. Nós vamos falar de vocês hoje e era uma honra incrível para eu ficar com vocês e o meu coração está cheio de passar tempo com vocês. Você pode ligar as legendas on YouTube e assistir tudo. Que Deus te abençoe. All right, that was from my Brazilian friends. And I told them that it was such an honor to be there with them, to be able to visit with them and teach in Portuguese the whole time, and thank them for keeping me, and told them that they can watch this service in English and just put on the English subtitles and they'll be able to see all of it. So as y'all know, I just went on a 10-day trip to Brazil, and it was a long trip. I'm so glad I'm back. It's not easy to not sleep in your own bed. And I left here on a Wednesday night. I think my plane left around, from here at 7, it left from DC around 10:30 at night, and it was about a 9.5, 10-hour flight. I didn't sleep a lick all night, as you can imagine, on those little planes, and there's not a lot of room. I was really jealous walking through first class. Those seats, they recline and everything. You could just sleep back there, but anyhow. So maybe someday I'll wake up in a dream and be in first class. But it was really crazy. I got there early in the morning, and if I had to do this trip over there again, I would go a day early so I could sleep one day before I got started, because I went straight to a friend's house, somebody that they'd set me up with. He had a little hammock on his porch, and I went out there and slept for 30 minutes, and he woke me up for lunch, and I would have liked to have slept in that hammock all day long if I could have. But I had to get up, and his name was Kleber, and he took me to camp. And by nighttime, I was at that camp and teaching the next morning. I didn't take one bit of a break. It's a miracle I didn't get sick while I was there. He was a really interesting gentleman. He is a data analyst. He called himself a data scientist, and he works for Mercado Livre, which he says is the Amazon of South America. And he's been a Christian for many years at the 9 de Julho Church, which is the one that my parents helped establish in São Paulo, Brazil. He came after our time, but in 1992 or 3, somewhere around that time, my dad went there and did a big lecture series on his new book that I've taught. It was new then, that I've taught to you all about Egyptian history and the pharaohs of Joseph and the Pharaoh of Moses. And so he had gotten the book. He read the whole thing. He reads English perfectly. He was such a joy to be with. He drove me to camp, drove me back after camp. He's on the camp board, and he's also the camp treasurer out there. And so he got me to camp, and for those of you, just to remind you, if you didn't know, I went to a men's retreat out at a camp that I grew up at, and this is breakfast Friday morning. So you could see some of the buildings in the background. That was actually the ladies' area. And then there were even more buildings on the other side of the camp, and I didn't get a video of all those, where all the men stayed. Now, this was a men's only retreat, and so my group was up on the ladies' cabins, which I thought was probably a smart move. I'm going to suspect they were nicer than the men's cabins. And but we were up there. There were 285 men there, and that's a picture of the worship there before one of the speeches. They used to have about 450, but because of the pandemic, they quit for 2 years. And last year they had 185, and they had 285 this year, and they think they're probably going to be growing that thing back up again. Kleber told me that. I said, well, how'd that get started? And he said, well, your group, your parents' missionary team sort of started it, but he said we were the initiators, us Brazilians. The American missionaries would have a once-a-year sort of gathering out there, and we said, well, why aren't we invited? So they started a men's retreat. And so one of the incredible experiences was just listening to them worship, and I want you to hear just a few minutes of them worshiping before one of the speeches. So I could listen to that all day. And it was such a great experience to see people that were sold out for Jesus. You know, Jesus is the answer wherever you go in the world. We're all alike. And we're all trying to make sense out of our life. We're all trying to find purpose and meaning in our life. And we all have to deal with suffering, as Steve was talking about during the Lord's Supper. And that series will start back up next week. But if you don't put your trust in Jesus, what do you have? What do you have to look forward to? And these were men that were just sold out to Jesus. And I got to deliver one of the speeches there. I was humbled that they would even ask me. And mine was being a church that's prepared together. And it was out of the passage in Matthew 25 where Jesus says, I was a stranger and you took me in. So the word in Portuguese for took me in is acolher, which is together, is the way we would translate it. And so I've been talking, or it seems like I talk about hospitality and evangelism fairly regularly. And so that was right down my alley. But these were my 4 points at the very end, my practical ones, where the first one was it starts with you. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to gather other people besides your friends into your life. God has other people out there that he wants gathered, and you have to gather them. The church doesn't really gather them. Individuals do. Collectively we do, but only if individuals are gathering. And the second point was you have to transform the church culture for that to happen. And I talked about this a few weeks ago. And I talked about this in the Elders Deacons meeting not too long ago as well. Culture eats strategy every day. You can have the best laid plans in organization, but if we don't transform our hearts, nothing changes. The third point was that you have to open your eyes. And I talked about the Samaritan woman on the hill and how the apostles came back and Jesus said, open your eyes, the harvest is ready, and reminded them that God's always working. And that lesson goes for us, right? God is at work in our community, and there's people whose hearts he's prepared to know Jesus. And if we don't open our eyes, we're going to walk right by him. And then the last point was take Jesus in this year, or acolhe Jesus esse ano. And the point was at the end of this year, so see, I'm preaching you my sermon. At the end of this year, I want you to look back and ask yourself the question, did I see Jesus when he walked by in front of me? Did I invite him in when he was looking for somebody? Did I give him clothing? Did I feed him? Because we all know that Jesus said in Matthew 25, when you do that to the least of these, you've done it to me. So that was my sermon to him. And that's what I left them with. And they, I'm sure, were a lot more instructional, inspirational to me than I was to them. They inspired me all week long, these people of faith and these people that gave these lectures. There were about 7 men, I think, over Friday and Saturday till lunch that gave these lectures. And I was walking up the hill after lunch, I guess, or right before lunch on Saturday. And I was walking up this hill on Friday, and I heard somebody call my name. I turned around, I looked around, and this guy knew my name. And he came up to me and said, "You don't recognize me, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, my name is Vitor." I immediately knew who he was and gave him the biggest hug. We grew up in church together, going to Sunday school class, and I haven't seen him since 1977. And he's about a year and a half younger than me, so he hung out more with my brother than he did me, but it was like seeing my best friend again. And we sat down and talked about when I was a kid and my family would go to his house and we would eat with his parents. And we talked. He was there in 1977 when I went back and worked as a counselor for 3 months at camp there. And they always have a game between the camp counselors and the those that are attending the camp. So the ones attending the camp, the students there said, "Well, we're not going to play against the counselors this year unless Kevin plays with us." And they came and told me I couldn't play with the counselors. I had my feelings hurt, but I played with the students there, and we beat them. And we beat them good. And I scored most of the goals. And so he's the only one that can verify I'm not bragging on that thing. And I told him, I said, "I need to get your address because I've told other people the story. You're the only one who can verify it." But we spent an hour on Friday and an hour on Saturday, and it just filled my soul. His dad, this is a picture of his dad right next to my father, and his name is Abramu Lucarelli. And you won't remember this probably, but I told his story a year ago before Monica and I went to Brazil, actually on vacation, but we went ahead and stopped by the church in Campo Grande. And his dad, I've been told by others, was the greatest Brazilian evangelist that has been there so far. And sure enough, while I was talking to Vitor, somebody came up to meet me because they had announced that my dad was Ted Stewart. As you'll see in a minute, he had a huge influence in Brazil, and people all over either know him or know who he is. But this guy walked up to meet me because I was Ted Stewart's son, was talking to me, and he said, "Well, who's this?" "Well, this is Vitor Lucarelli." And he said, "Well, what's your dad's name?" "Abramu." He said, "Your dad baptized me." And they had the greatest talk right there. And I've been told that my dad was the greatest American missionary evangelist that they had out of that first group, and they were best friends. And so I got to hang out with his son. I met so many people, and I apologize up front that my dad's going to be in a lot of these stories. When they announced that he was my dad, all these people came up to talk to me that had some connection with my father. This was Adriano. And Adriano, if I was guessing, is in his early 30s, married, no kids yet. He came up and said, "I want to meet you and I want to tell you a story." And he said, my parents didn't really go to church. My mom was Catholic but didn't go. My dad was an alcoholic. And so my grandparents basically raised me. And he said, and they were church hopping, and we went to this church and that, but we finally settled in at an Assembly of God. And he said, but I wasn't real super dedicated, and I found this little building called A Escola da Bíblia. And in Portuguese, that's the school of the Bible. And this was a methodology that my parents' team started that's still effective over there. They would get a downtown office building and call it the School of the Bible, A Escola da Bíblia, and offer certificates. And people would sign up. You could advertise it, and people wanted to know the Bible, and they would sign up and come after work at night. And in fact, that's how the gentleman I just showed you, his father was converted that way. He saw this advertisement for the Bible school, and he wanted to go. And so he said, I was walking by in João Pessoa, which is a city sort of in the northeast on the coast, and he said, I saw this school of the Bible, and I went in and found out how to enroll and said, I'm going to come back and enroll. And he said, I went to church and told my pastor at the Assembly of God, he said, you're not going to that church. or to that school of the Bible. They're just trying to convert you, and we're going to convert you here at the Assembly of God. You're not going to need them. So he felt really bad. So he went back the next day and said, y'all, I'm really sorry, but where my grandparents go to church, that pastor told me I can't come. I'm not going to be able to enroll. And they said, well, we want to send you this little book. And he said, I went back and I looked at this little book and read it, and it changed my life. And I decided to leave the Assembly of God, and I went and was baptized and became a Christian. And he said, that book was written by your father, Ted Stewart. And I thought, wow, just kind of hit me. All these dad stories, I'm going to have to get over that. But somehow Keith Lancaster went to Brazil, and he met Keith Lancaster. And if you don't know him, he's well known in the Churches of Christ. You need to Google him. But he started the group A Cappella, and he was doing some praise and worship training in Brazil, and met him and helped Adriano come to the United States and go through Worship Leader Institute. And now he has several churches in the U.S. that support him, and he does worship leader training in Brazil. At the end of the conference, him and 3 other guys got up and did a little quartet and said, here's what we can teach your church how to do. So they sing in harmony there, and they've trained. But I wanted to give you just a few seconds of him leading worship. You'll be able to tell he was trained at the Worship Leader Institute. He's an exciting young man to listen to. He was infectious, let me tell you. You could not be around that young man without smiling. He had one of the biggest smiles I've ever seen, and he knows how to smile while he's singing. That's got to be a talent, no doubt. Then I had this gentleman come up to me, and his name was Marco Pereira, and he's an evangelist in Brazil. And boy, was he, just to hear about how he preaches to his church and all these things. And he said, I want you to know, Kevin, that your father baptized my mother and my uncle and my aunt. And I said, well, who is your aunt and uncle? And he said, my uncle is Walter Lapa, a well-known preacher in the Churches of Christ. And he said, the only reason your father did not baptize my father is he wasn't ready. It took us a long time, and someone else baptized him later. But he said, I'm a Christian today because your father came down to Brazil and baptized my family. And he said, and now I preach the gospel, and I'm out leading others to Christ. And I called my mom on WhatsApp. You can use WhatsApp as the messaging device and international phone call app of choice in Brazil, because the Apple products charge you money. And so I was sending all this stuff to my mom, and I told her about it. And she said, oh, I know his mom. Her name is Maria. And I remember his dad, Norberto. And my mom just loved this trip. She was living vicariously through me. And but here's another guy who came up. His name was Luciano Toledo. And Luciano said, I wanted to meet you. He said, I saw your dad teach Daniel in Portuguese on one of the video lessons they have there in Brazil. And then I was in Recife going to a preaching school there, in Alvaro Pestana, who is somebody I went to Sunday school with as well there at 9 de Julho. And we were friends. There is now a Bible professor. And he said, he taught me your dad's book. And I got to do all that. And I told him, I want to meet this man, Ted Stewart, someday and give him a hug. And he said, well, Ted Stewart's passed away. And he said, but now his son's here, and I want to give you a hug. And so he gave me this big hug. And I'm going to tell you, they're a hugging group. I saw Rich Leak this morning. He came up and shook my hand. I started to grab him, give him a hug, but that hand was kind of pretty stiff right there in my way. And I'm sure he would have taken a hug, but I remembered I'm back in the United States now. And y'all remember Christian a couple of weeks ago saying how you had to do all these kissing. Well, I got there and I knew that and saw it. I was still uncomfortable blowing kisses at the side of these Brazilian women's face. But, you know, I finally, and not to insult them, tried to do my best air kiss that I could, you know. And when I was giving them hugs, I didn't want them to think I was being a rude American or anything. But so there were all sorts of other people that came up to me and told me, I saw your dad's book on Daniel or this or that. But I tried to get to know a lot of people, and this man, his name is Paulo Sergio dos Santos, and we were in line together, and we were just talking, and I got to know him, and I asked him about his story, and he said, last month in March is 1 year that I've been a Christian. And he said, God is working in my life. He said, I was about to move to a different city down south, and my landlord called me and said, look, don't be in a hurry. You can go month to month if you want. And he said, well, I'm going to take my time. And he said, I'm 50 years old, or he said, I think he's 51 now. And he said, I always thought when I'm 50, I need to just quit making money and do something more important in my life. He was a buyer and reseller of cars. And apparently he had a pretty successful business, and he's going to kind of semi-retire, keep doing that, move down south. And so he said, I decided to stay another month. And he said, it's the best thing I ever did, because I was walking down the road one day in my neighborhood. This guy came driving by on a bicycle and stopped and met me and asked me if I had studied the Bible before. And he said, no, I haven't. And he said he offered to study it with me, and I studied it with him and became a Christian. And he said, now I've moved to that new town, and there's not a church there. And I've already baptized my neighbor, and we've started a little church there. And he said, my goal is to lead others to Christ. I'm thinking, man, how exciting that is. And I wish we could bottle up some of his excitement and make a juice out of it and make all of you drink it. I'll drink it first, okay? If I don't die, the rest of you can drink it. But it was just so exciting. Later, he came and he said, I want to bring this. He brought this guy, Rui Diogo, and said, I want you to meet the guy that baptized me. And that was so exciting. I got to talk to him, and he is an evangelist. And he said that he's about to move to Iguazu Falls, which is real close to where the guy moved that he baptized. What are the odds of that? And he said that his team of missionaries are going to make little trips back and forth to his town to help him get the church started there, because he needs help. So that's going to be perfect. And he said, by the way, he said, I had a sponsor, and I went to Sunset International Bible Institute where I got my training. Your dad was one of my teachers. And I thought, well, there he is again. That guy, I can't get rid of him in Brazil. He just follows me around. So bless God for all the work he did. And this is, on the last day there, as I was getting ready to leave, this is just a group of men that I met. And the guy right in the middle there, his name is Vicente. And Vicente is the Rich Link and Eddie Shepherd of Nove de Julho Church of Christ. He attends the church where I grew up, and I got to worship with him Sunday. And he sat down and told me his story, and he said, man, I was on the streets. I was homeless. And he had a picture of it. I said, how'd you get a picture of yourself when I was homeless? He said, well, the government came around and documented a bunch of us. And I was able to go get a copy from the government of that documented kind of picture of me. And boy, he looked rough. And he told his life, how he was married to this wonderful lady, but he got hooked on drugs. And he said, I started stealing to buy drugs, and she kicked me out. And he said, I lost everything for years. And then somebody one day told me about Jesus, and they offered to let me stay in their house till I cleaned up. And they stayed with me. And he said, I felt back once, but I came back. And he said, Jesus changed my life. And he said, my wife waited for me all those years. She waited for me. And she took me back in, and now he's back with his family. What a miracle. Now he has a ministry, and he helps clean people up off the streets and teaches Jesus to them. And what a wonderful person he was to talk to. It was so fun talking to all these people, a little lighter side for a second. So occasionally I walk up to people, and they would think I was a Brazilian. And I was really kind of got a little full of myself when they'd tell me that. Of course, if they talked to me very long and I started forgetting words, they'd know I'm not a Brazilian. But then I met these two guys from Londrina, and they were Fernando Gustavo, and they were so cool, and they were Christians only 2 or 3 years. And we got to talking, and they said, hey, we know a Brazilian boxer whose son is going to be an American quarterback. They were just really proud that a Brazilian was being recruited to quarterback. And I said, well, what's his name? And they said, well, his name is Vitor Belfort. And he moved to the United States, but he's like a world champion boxer. And they said his son's name is David Belfort. And we looked him up, and sure enough, he was recruited by Virginia Tech. So if you see this David Belter, he's going to go play quarterback at Virginia Tech. And then his friend said, oh, you can't call him a Brazilian. He grew up over there in the United States. He probably doesn't even speak Portuguese that good. I said, yeah, I probably speak Portuguese better than him. They said, no, you probably talk about the same. So they knew how to take the air out of you real quick over there. And then this is my last picture out at camp. And the guy on the far right is Breno. Breno has an engineering degree. And he's really intelligent. And he got several offers to go be an engineer. But he's also a graduate of the Sercris Preaching School, which I'm going to tell you about here in a little bit. I say I'm going to have to get moving on this. But Breno turned down multiple lucrative offers to be an engineer so that he could work in the preaching school as a teacher. And I thought, wow, this young man that's devoting his life to God. And it was just inspiring. Then the person in the middle there, his name is Ranieri. He runs the AIM program in Brazil. They call it AMI. And this is a picture of all these graduates. And some of them are mates, and so they weren't AIM students. But most of these are people that have gone through. And this is like the program that Christian and Angela went through that we've told you all about. And I was so impressed with the young men that were at that retreat that have been through this program. And he's going to be here in the U.S. in February, and who knows, we may have Ranieri come here and tell about his work with the young people there. I'd love to have him, and that is a possibility. But then I went to São Paulo, and this is where I did Easter Sunday. So while you were worshiping God here on Easter Sunday, and thank you, Christian, for preaching that day, I was worshiping in a different language in Brazil. But we're all one in Christ. And I was thinking about you and had y'all in my mind and heart while I was there worshiping with brothers that I didn't know at a church, though, where I grew up. And it was a really wonderful experience. Then after that, they took me to the airport, and that's me in Campo Grande. That's the city that we're partnering with, by the way, the Central Church in downtown Campo Grande. It's a city of 1 million. There are partners with us in great cities in supporting the church plant that we're supporting in Boa Vista. I met a missionary there, David McKinney, and he grew up in Brazil. His father, Joe McKinney, was a student at Sunset. And my dad had gotten there 2 years before and was recruiting a team. And my father recruited his father and mother to be missionaries in Brazil. And I told my mom I'd met his son. And she said, oh, I still remember them in our living room when Dad was telling them about how God would work through him in Brazil. And he had a wonderful work there in Brazil for many years. And his son stayed and married a Brazilian woman named Adriana. And he has 2 beautiful daughters, Sienna and Brila. And they invited me over to their house. And his daughters were bossy. And they told us all what to do. And they had these cute shows. They told me that I had to pay them after the show, or I couldn't leave the house. And I said, well, I'm just going to spend the night with y'all then. And their eyes got real big. And they also promised me that what happens in Brazil stays in Brazil. So just keep that in mind. But they had a lot of costumes, and they made us all wear something, and they chose that cute little clown's hat for me. But he's moved there to Campo Grande to be a preacher a teacher at the preaching school. And this is not all the students, but a lot of the students. I spent a week there teaching them Christian evidences of the Old Testament, taught them my dad's evidences on Egypt and Joseph and Moses. And I also taught them some New Testament evidences. We had the best time, and these students were just so interested in the Bible and so eager, and many of them are very young, as you can see. And somebody took this picture of me. I don't know if I'm trying to stay awake there or just really excited about what I'm saying, but I would call that the Brazilian jeito, that's the Brazilian way. You know, they talk a lot with their hands and everything else. But this school was fascinating to me. They've trained 130 students. That only adds up to 119. That map's a little off. And the students came from these different parts of Brazil. But somebody was trying to raise money to send these students to Sunset to go get training. So Zanata, who I'll show you a picture of at the end that we've been working with, who is a former elder, he's not officially an elder, but sort of leads that church there in Campo Grande, told me that he went to a church that had helped support the creation and planting of that church in Campo Grande, where he was a member, and said, I got a better idea. Instead of sending them to the United States, why don't we train them in Brazil? And he raised money, and here's what young people can do. If they want to go work at that school, one of their choices is they can go work at that school and stay there. It's about a 2 to 3 year program, and get a degree, and the church will pay for their degree and pay for their training, but you have to be in good standing with the school. And when they're done, they have a trained worker with a vocational capability, and then they send them back in Brazil, and they are in all these cities all over Brazil, and now they're the leaders in the church there. And some people want to go into full-time ministry, and so if you want to go in full-time ministry and you don't want the money for a college degree, you can just go straight through the preaching school. Now, your church has to support you there, and when you're done, you go back to your church, and the fund that pays for this will pay 50% of their salary their first 3 years, and 25% the next 2 years if they're working ministry part-time. And they have sent out all their graduates all over Brazil. And 14 of those dots, I don't know if that's yellow or green down there in the bottom left, but those are new church plants where there weren't churches, and their graduates went to these cities without a church and started one. So I was just so impressed with that. And in fact, this is a church plant. It was completed 2006, 2009, and they raised money and built a building. And this was done in the same town as Campo Grande, where that big church is that we're partnering with. They started another church, and it's just had explosive growth. It's the city of Amelia, another part of town. They have 2 or 3 house churches they've started. They're just evangelizing their city. They don't expect everybody in the town of Amelia to come to their church, so they're planting them. And one of their students, and I'm getting close to the end, I promise, is Cristiano. And I met Cristiano, and he said that Alan Dutton had baptized his father and mother. And I said, well, my father baptized Alan Dutton's wife, Maria Dutton, who is a Brazilian. He went over to Brazil as a single missionary. My dad converted their language teacher, and she became a Christian and married Alan Dutton. And Alan Dutton converted his family, and he said, I kind of grew up in the church because my parents became Christians, but I left for about 15 years. And I started dating this girl that I thought I probably need to straighten my life up if I want to marry her. And so I started taking her to meet my parents, and they invited her to church. And I thought, well, that's great. Well, she's at church, you know, I'm going to go out and play. So they'd take her to church, and he'd go hang out with the guys. And finally, though, she started getting more and more interested in church and wanted to become a Christian. She said, why aren't you coming to church with me? And he said, she started putting some pressure, and he said, I always knew down deep that I needed to go back to God one day. And his soon-to-be wife said, now's the day. If you're going to stay with me, you're going to have to put the Lord first in your life. And he worked for many years, and now he's decided, he's 50 now, that he's been called to be an evangelist. And he is going through the preaching school, and he said, I'm going to go to Iguaçu Falls and plant a church. I said, Iguazu Falls, what's your last name? And he said, Diogo. And I said, oh, I met your brother Rui at the men's retreat. He was the one who baptized that guy I showed you earlier who went to Sunset. My dad taught him. He said, that's my brother, and I'm going to go have a team there, and we're going to start a church. And I'll tell you what blew me away is how many people I found that were just sold out on the gospel. That's what blew me away. This is the couple I stayed with, and it's Zanata and Layla, and they were so sweet and let me stay in one of their rooms. And he just is already like a brother to me, even though he's about 5 or 6 years older than me. And we had such a good time there. And what a man of God. He was baptized as, as a young man in his late 20s or something, been a Christian now for so many years. But when I was there, a couple things hit me. If you have your Bibles, we have a couple verses and we're going to be done. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 29. And in Jeremiah 29, Jeremiah is predicting that Judah is going to be captives for 70 years in Babylon. If you remember, even Daniel in his book was reading Jeremiah and said, well, I think we're coming close to the end of the 70 years. And it says in verse 11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. And then you can call upon me and come and pray to me, and I'll hear you. And you'll seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I'll be found by you. And he said, listen, I know your plans, and I have plans for you. I want you to know my plans. I want to bless you. And the thing about Christianity, we're going to learn a lot during this series that we're doing on suffering, is the blessing of God even supersedes your suffering. You can't get out of suffering, but you can be blessed by God if you root your faith in him and trust him. But he says, I need you to pray for me, and I need you to trust me. And I need you to seek me with all your heart. And he says, when you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. And what I ran into were all these people that were so down on God, and they were talking to God, and God was moving in their life, and God let them find them. And I think sometimes we don't find God. We want him. That's why you're here, and we want more of him. But he says, if you seek me with your whole heart, if you pray to me, if you talk to me, if I'm the main thing you want, you're going to find me. So if you ever feel like you're knocking your head against the wall, or you think you want more, but you don't know how to get it, it's really pretty simple. You just decide that's what you really want. And if you did, there'd be a revival here. I mean, if we all decided God was what we wanted with all our heart, it would break out in a revival here. What's holding us back? Us. We're busy. We have all these things going on. Other passage, 2 Chronicles chapter 7. And so he says in verse 13, when I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among my people, in the future when I punish you, is basically what he's saying, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land. So listen to this. Humble yourselves and turn from your wicked ways and call out on God. Now, I think sometimes our problem, there's two problems. First, if you're involved in any sort of wickedness, just give it up. I promise you that there's going to be a pain and suffering and judgment on the other end of that you don't want to go to. And when you get there, you can turn back to God, but you're going to carry it with you. Turn before it's too late. But I think a lot of us, we don't really see ourselves doing these wicked things. Our problem is we just know so many good things that are general life, we don't really have a lot of room for God in us. And it's more the sin of omission. So my question for you is, what are you not doing in your life that you know God wants you to do? I stopped because I want you to think about it. What are you not doing in your life that you know God wants you to do? You know, final story. A couple weeks ago, I was preaching, and My wife walked right down here and sat in the front row. How many of y'all saw that? Not very many. That's good. She went, and I thought, well, she just wants a front row seat to see me. But then she started, I'm preaching and she's signaling at me. I'm thinking, this can't be good. And she's doing this. And so I check, well, no, it's still there, you know. And then I look at her and she's doing this. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm moving around too much. I'm getting a little worried. So I don't know whether I stop and ask her what she's trying to say to me or keep going. So I'm embarrassed to say I ignored her and just went on. She said, don't do that again. I said, I'm sorry. But what she's trying to tell me is this little thing had come out loose, and I guess it was just flapping back here through my whole sermon. So those on that side probably saw y'all were spared. So I said, well, next time I'll just stop my whole sermon and say, Monica, I'm sorry, what do you need? So if I do that, just you'll know what I'm doing. Don't get worried about it or anything. It's just that I want to sleep in my bed that night. First things first. But I couldn't understand what she was trying to tell me, and I want you to know that God's talking to you every single day. God wants your attention. He has things for you to do. He has people He wants you to meet. He wants in your heart. You just have to listen, which was what Joseph Perry was talking about in his class this morning. You just have to listen. And I beg you to open your ears and open your eyes, open your heart, and let God talk to you, because if you do, it's going to ignite a fire in you that nobody can put out. Nobody can light it but God, and nobody can let Him but you. Let's let God transform our lives. Let's let God decide what our priorities are going to be from here on out. Amen? Let's stand and sing.